covering the stories that impact your life, your town, your state, and your future. This is the Means Report with your host, Brad Means.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Means Report. We certainly appreciate you spending part of your day with us, and today we are going to get you up to speed on a couple of things: politics and literacy. We are so pleased to have Chris Stirewalt from NewsNation to talk about presidential politics. It's never too early to do that. The 2024 election is coming up quickly. Also, you know, it is never too late for literacy. No matter the age, there's a wonderful resource in Augusta that can help folks learn to read and write, and they're having a huge back-to-school event. Parents and caregivers, you're going to want to attend. Stay with us for that interview. But first, we are so happy to welcome to the Means Report the political editor for NewsNation, Chris Stirewalt. Chris, thank you so much for coming back to the Means Report. We certainly appreciate it, especially during this very busy time for you.
Good to be back with you indeed.
All right, Chris, so here's the deal. This edition of the Means Report is going to air after this week's town hall with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I do want to ask you a couple of quick questions about candidate Kennedy, though, and here's my take on him. Comes from a famous political family, one of the most prominent ones. He's 69 years old and appears to be in incredible shape, and he's anti-COVID vaccine. What else is there about him?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say because I really think this town hall comes at a crucial point in his candidacy, right? He's generated tons and tons of attention, but a lot of it on the right and not a lot of it among Democratic voters. In fact, there's something of a backlash that's been brewing on the left. So, by the time this airs, the story is going to be a different one because it is a consequential debate. And he has to be able to make his case to Democratic voters, not just have a famous last name, not just have controversial positions, but connect with Democratic voters on core sort of kitchen table issues that matter to them.
Do you think that his message or just his candidacy period is resonating more with Republicans and independents because they want to try to ding President Biden, or do you think those folks really like him?
Look, I think there has been a considerable number of progressive populists inside the Democratic Party, many of the folks who supported Bernie Sanders. There's a strong element of sort of anti-establishment, anti-authority, anti-everythingness in that Bernie bro lane of the Democratic Party. There is no question about that. But I certainly think you're right that mischief-making on the right, mischief-making among Republicans to sort of try to foist Kennedy onto the Democratic Party and make him a problem for Joe Biden, I think has been very real. I think that's true. That's why the town hall is such an essential, crucial moment for Kennedy, because it's about talking to real Democratic voters, making a case on practical terms, not just being famous.
Chris, don't get me wrong. I'm a company man through and through, and I support NewsNation having this town hall. I think it's an important thing to have, and I know it's going to be a huge success. My question, though, is it too early? Do people, other than your diehard political fans, care at this point?
Well, I mean, you got to start somewhere. You got to start sometime. The summer before presidential election year is when you start doing things on a shakedown, right? You take the boat out of the harbor and you see how it runs, and that's what Kennedy is doing. He is trying to get into a race. The Republicans are engaged, but not yet fully engaged. Democrats aren't even thinking about it, right? It is still very early for these voters, but this is also when opinions and attitudes start to take shape. This is the phase in a nominating process. Summertime, the year before, is when people start to pick favorites and people do a little skywriting. What could I have if I could have anything? Who would I choose if I could have anything that I wanted? And this is that sort of hazy period that precedes some harder choices that get made at the end of this year.
Well, I know we'll talk about this next question closer to November 2024, but let me just ask you now, do you think that Kennedy could potentially get enough votes to, let's don't even talk about him beating President Biden. Let's just say, could he get enough votes to make Biden lose?
Well, certainly his uncle could tell something of that story. Ted Kennedy in 1980 was the hellacious problem for Jimmy Carter. There's that story. And then there's also, of course, the story of his own father, Robert F. Kennedy Sr. And after Lyndon Johnson had a bad outing in New Hampshire, he won, but it was close. RFK Sr. jumped in the race late after the New Hampshire primary and essentially drove Lyndon Johnson out of the presidential election. Johnson got out in favor of his vice president, Hubert Humphrey, who did go on to win the nomination, of course, after the tragic murder of Bobby Kennedy. So there's a lot of precedent, and there's certainly precedent in the Republican Party too. Pat Buchanan in 1992 cost George Bush the elder dearly. Ronald Reagan in 1976 put a hurting on Gerald Ford. So is it possible that Kennedy could garner enough support to be consequential in the Democratic nominating process? Yes. Is it possible that he could run as an independent? Yes. The question there, though, is who would he take more votes away from? If it was Biden versus Trump, I think it might be Trump.
Interesting. It's going to be so fascinating to watch. Let me ask you a few just general political questions, if I may, beginning with President Biden's son, Hunter, recently agreeing to plead guilty to federal tax and firearms crimes. Is that going to have an impact on President Biden, in your opinion?
Well, I think it is having an impact. The fact that it took Hunter Biden this long to cut a plea deal was really shocking to me. For all of the money that Hunter Biden, all the advantages that Hunter Biden got because of his famous last name, that he was hanging around and going to try to fight this gun charge and fight these tax evasion charges seemed just wild to me, given the reputational harm that it was doing to his dad, and how it created questions about why Donald Trump was being prosecuted for some things, but Hunter Biden hadn't yet pleaded guilty. So I think this is step one for Hunter Biden. Right. Step one is you got to deal with these lesser matters. But the big stuff, which is about how he made that money overseas and what exactly, maybe I put it this way. I understand why Joe Biden would want to invite his son to the state dinner with the president of India when he was in town recently. I understand why Joe Biden wants a lot of good things for his son, his surviving son. What I cannot understand is how Hunter Biden can possibly excuse being a public figure, given all of the scandal around him and all of the problems, because it really drags down his dad. It opens up the door to all of the speculation that Republicans have about how Hunter Biden made all this money exploiting his family's name, and their allegations that Joe Biden himself directly benefited from it. So I find what Hunter Biden's doing to his dad and to his party really just inexcusable.
Let's talk about Republicans for a moment. Just give me your take on the state of the GOP presidential race and how you think these indictments coming down against former President Trump will impact his chances of getting back to the White House.
Well, I think initially what you get when Trump, it's weird, we see how bad an idea Alvin Bragg's prosecution in Manhattan of Donald Trump was, because if it would have been, if he'd had a big deal, it might have had significant effects, but it was pretty obvious even to the harshest critics of the former president that Bragg was bootstrapping here and turning misdemeanors into felonies, and it felt thin. And this primed Republicans for, okay, we stand by our guy, and it triggered this response. The charges that Trump faces now are much more serious, right? And they're should be much more concerning to Republicans. When you hear Bill Barr, the former attorney general who defended Trump through the Russiagate stuff, when you hear the former Secretary of Defense Mark Esper talking about Trump's exposure on the classified document stuff and how it endangers national security, when you hear this stuff, you understand the sizable liabilities for Trump. I think right now for Republicans, the appeal of Trump is sticking it to the man, right? You pick Donald Trump, you stand with your guy. It's about loyalty, number one, somebody who a lot of Republicans think got a raw deal in 2020. Then it's about being as offensive in your face as possible to Democrats and the news media, right? You say we shouldn't have Trump, you're prosecuting Trump. Well, we're gonna stick him right up your left nostril. And I can see why that is very appealing for a lot of Republicans. Question for Trump is how long? How well will this wear? And as you get into the fall, as I was saying before, this is the time where you're thinking about what you might conceivably want in a candidate and what feels good. As things march on, you have to make a decision. For Republicans to have Donald Trump after January 6th, after the prosecutions, after everything, for them to nominate Donald Trump again seems like an extraordinary risk. And I don't know whether that thinking will sink in for Republicans between here and there. But as we move into the fall, we'll get ready to find out.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, as we wrap things up, you're not 100% convinced Trump will be the nominee.
I think it's going to get real weird, and I think it's going to get really intense. Donald Trump may go from pen to post and get the nomination. He may lead from beginning to end and have the nomination, but that's just not how it's worked in the past. But, who knows? Certainly, it's going to be beyond interesting, fascinating to watch.
Well, it will be, and we appreciate you holding our hand along the way, as always, Chris Stirewalt, and helping us understand all things political. We wish you all the best with the town hall and hope you'll come back soon, sir.
So good to talk to you.
You too.